Dr. Hadley Kruczek-Aaron is a historical archaeologist whose research examines the ways that class, gender, race, and religion have lived in 19th century America. She explored these topics in her 2015 book, Everyday Religion, an Archaeology of Protestant Belief and Practice in the 19th Century, which focused on archaeology carried out at sites associated with Central New York abolitionist Gerrit Smith, one of which she will be talking a lot about today. We do not have the book available for purchase, but you can buy it online. Since that time, Hadley has continued to explore similar questions at sites across Northern New York, including those associated with Civil War soldiers, loggers, reformers, tourists, and farmers, especially associated with the Timbuctoo site, which you'll learn a lot more about today, which was a 19th century community of African Americans living in the Adirondacks. Dr. K.A., as her students like to call her, is committed to collaborative approaches to archaeology. She has partnered with public institutions, private landowners, descendants, nonprofits, and other educators to carry out research and develop curriculum and public programming related to her work. Hadley has a PhD from Syracuse University and has been a professor at SUNY Potsdam since 2005. And a lot of what she'll be talking about today are the current research projects that she's working on with her students there. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hadley Kruczek-Aaron.
Thank you so much, Carlene. Thank you so much to all of you for taking your lunch break with us and online. Welcome. It's great to be here. I always tell my students that there's nothing closer to time travel than archaeology. And so we'll do a little thought exercise, I thought, to start us off by imagining that we are back in time about 175 years. We're in 1849. We're at the edge of an Adirondack, dense Adirondack forest. At the edge of that forest, you see a family, a young Black family headed by Lyman Epps, who is in his mid-30s, and his wife, Amelia Ann Epps, who is about the same age, and their two young children, 4-year-old Eveline and 2-year-old Lyman Jr. So if you can imagine this family approached by wagon, they had just come to the edge of these North Elba Woods, which is the town in which the village of Lake Placid sits, after a long journey of coming from Troy, New York, hundreds of miles away, and about to go into these woods to take possession of 40 acres of land that they had been given as part of a land grant initiated by Central New York reformer Gerrit Smith. At this time, Anna is also pregnant. She doesn't know it, but she's pregnant with twins, and she's far along. And I guess I would ask you all, and maybe people at home, to think about how are they feeling? How is this family feeling at that moment? What do you think? Anybody want to take a stab at how this family is feeling right at this moment? 1849, family of 4, about to change their life radically.
Think of where we even begin.
Where do we even begin? Yeah. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Is this their choice to do this?
This was their choice to do it.
Well, if it's their choice, I think they'd probably be happy that they're doing it.
Excitement,
Yeah.
kind of coupled with overwhelming anxiety, a little bit of trepidation. What?
Hopeful and terrified.
Hopeful and terrified. I think that is a good combination there. I think that hits the mark, right? Imagine, changing your life so much, going very far from home, with this new opportunity to be a landowner at a time when Black land ownership was very rare. Okay. So it would have represented economic opportunity. It would have represented political opportunity, because at this time, if you were a Black man in New York, you couldn't vote unless you owned $250 worth of property. It would have represented a great change in their lifestyle, because they were coming from an urban area of Troy, this industrial commercial center at the time. And Lyman is listed in the city directories as being a waiter. And so he's in the service sector. Yes, sir.
At what time were they locating in the Adirondacks?
This is 1849.
And what was their prior life experience?
So they were coming immediately from Troy, New York, right? And before that, they had been in New York City. That's where they met and married. Before that, Lyman Epps was from Connecticut. He is the son of a Pequod man, so he's has indigenous heritage. And his mother was an enslaved Black woman who was enslaved in Connecticut. So this would have represented quite a change from their immediate lifestyle. And so I think you hit all of the right feelings of what this family would have been feeling. I can't imagine having toddlers too on that journey, right? In a wagon, hours and hours in that wagon with your possessions. There's not even a road into their land. They would have probably had to bushwhack their way in. Did you have a question or?
Well, I was just wondering, was the land, the topography that they saw, what they expected? Were they expecting farmland or?
It's hard to know what they expected.
Yeah.
I think they knew that it was going to be challenging, because these are the mountains, right, of the Adirondacks, a short growing season and rocky soil. Not impossible, right? But it would have been challenging. You would have to be somewhat skilled to make this work. And so, it's difficult for us now and for me now, as somebody who's gotten to know this family for more than a decade now of research, to know what they're feeling or to know what they expected. But I think it's really important, as we talk about their experience and we talk about this history, to consider those feelings and to think about what they were experiencing as we understand the historical significance of the movement that they joined and the choices that they were making to be a part of this historic experiment. My goal today is to flesh out their story, to tease out a little bit more about their experience, and to give a sense of what we have done as archaeologists to try and document the history of this settlement. So let's talk. We'll go back in time even further from that moment in 1849 when they're at the edge of the woods, because I want to give you a better sense of what they were coming into, how they made their decision, and what the circumstances were for that choice that they made to make that big change in their lifestyle and to join this movement. As I mentioned, the Eppses were living in Troy, in a neighborhood close by to the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church. We know that this neighborhood was an enclave of Black settlement, and the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church was a Black church, and it was a center of Black activism at this time. The Troy itself was home to a small but vibrant Black community. They were very active, had schools, had newspapers of their own, had churches. They were employed in the service economy and in the industrial sector, making do in this commercial center that was thriving at the time for manufacturing. And as a commercial center, that's strategically located near the canal and near the Hudson River, right, and near the mountains. And so it was rising at this time. We know that in 1847, there was a Black National Convention that was held in Troy at the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church. And these national conventions had been held elsewhere, and they were opportunities for the Black community to come together to think about the problems of the day and how to address them. So to think about questions, the question of slavery, for example, right? We're in the supposed free North here, and slavery was still thriving in the South. And so that would have been a main issue that would have been discussed at one of these meetings, right? How to approach that? Do you approach it politically? Do we of free Black Northerners? How can we better circumstances? How can we create more economic opportunity? How can we fight against structural obstacles to their ability to rise up the ranks? Right. So, for example, the issue of voting, right, in New York, for example, and in other states at this time, there were barriers to the vote, and they would have met to try and think about how to best tackle that problem. It's likely that at this meeting, they heard about this great gift that was given in 1846 by the abolitionist Gerrit Smith that I mentioned. This was a very wealthy man who was from Madison County, New York. His father had been a fur trader with John Jacob Astor, and had acquired a lot of land. And he decided to leave the business and gave a lot of his land to his son, Gerrit Smith. And Gerrit Smith proceeded to make even more money on top of that, investing in canals and railroads in the mid 19th century. He was also a religious man who converted to evangelical Protestantism, had his conversion experience in the late 1820s, and very much became embraced by Second Great Awakening ideals of living one's beliefs and having one's faith be expressed through your actions. And as part of that, he became active in a number of reform movements, including abolition, including temperance, including suffrage, including land reform, including prison reform, you name it. It's a laundry list of reform activities, which he viewed as a way of battling against sins and institutions that prevented people from being their best Christian selves. And so as part of that, he was mostly, I think his front and center issue was slavery. And he was challenged at some point by these land reformers who, he was a very big landowner, owned land in every county in New York State, and so was a huge landowner at this time. And he was challenged by land reformers who said to him, "We know you're not going to do anything about this, but we want you to know that you're being a hypocrite for enslavers, because you're just as bad as an enslaver because you're a land monopolist, and you're not allowing the common person to be landowners, because they're always going to be renters, and they can't have the affirming value of land ownership. And Gerrit Smith thought about that, and he said, you know, maybe you're onto something. And I am going to take that critique, and I am going to show you that I'm going to do something about it. And he decided to give away 120,000 acres of his own land. So I'll say that again, 120,000 acres of land in 1846 to 3,000 Black New Yorkers, as a way to combine his interests of, you know, recognizing the power of being a land monopolist and the downside of being a land monopolist, and trying to change people's lives, to give them economic power, to get them out of cities, to give them a chance to get the right to vote. These parcels wouldn't have been worth enough to vote, so they would have had to improve the land in order to get it to that $250 value. So you can imagine, it's likely that Lyman Epps and others were sitting in the audience hearing about this, had read about it in Black newspapers at the time. And I guess I would ask you all to tell me what you think they were thinking when they heard about this gift. What do you think they would think to hear that somebody was giving away 120,000 acres of land to 3,000 Black New Yorkers? Yes, skeptical. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, was that land all in what we know to be the Adirondack Park? Were the people in the Adirondack Park real happy about this?
So we're going to get to that. And, you know, it was largely in Franklin and Essex County. And so that was where this settlement and where all of those 3,000 parcels would have been. So yes, it was in one place, and it got a mixed response, I would say, from the people who lived in the Adirondacks. And we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah. How else besides, you know, skeptical? What else do you think?
Just hopeful, just
Hopeful.
ability to establish, provide something for your kids, you know,
Mhm.
and, you know, be any citizen of the country.
Exactly. Hopeful, right?
Well, and it sounds like a lot of them had an urban
Yep.
background,
Mhm.
so how would they learn how to live there with logging or farming or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah.
Seems like some of them wouldn't have that knowledge.
Yeah, there are questions about the knowledge that folks would have had. I think that there was a range of backgrounds for people. And so, you know, certainly that would have been a concern by some who may have felt not prepared, I think. Yeah, I think it was a combination of all of those things: skeptical, hopeful, probably a little bit like, wow, like, you know, this is how often this doesn't happen, right? This is a time when this just doesn't happen, right? And so I think it certainly made Gerrit Smith to be an impressive individual at this time, who was willing to put his money where his mouth was at a time when so many white elites were not doing that. And so this would have been a really impressive moment, and he's praised in the newspapers. He's critiqued by Southern pro-slavery newspapers as well, saying he's a fool, and you know, you get racist commentary about how the people who are going to go and be a part of this won't know what they're doing, and that they're going to fail, and that all of this. But in the Black newspapers, it certainly would have been something that people were excited about and hopeful, and you know, thinking that this was quite a gift.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think Frederick Douglass had a newspaper in the Rochester area at the time.
Mhm.
Did he have any take on this?
He did. He was one of the partners.
Oh,
So you anticipated this slide very nicely. So Frederick Douglass and Gerrit Smith were actually very close friends. In fact, Frederick Douglass, in one of the reprints of Frederick Douglass's autobiography, he dedicates it to Gerrit Smith. Gerrit Smith is a very active financial supporter of the North Star newspaper of Rochester when Frederick Douglass leaves Massachusetts and comes to New York to start that very important newspaper. And he writes a lot about this gift, and along with these partners. So Gerrit Smith identifies leaders in the Black community who could be his partners in executing this gift, right? You can imagine this is quite a massive undertaking to identify 3,000 people who would be eligible and who would want to do this. And he had only minimal requirements, that you had to be a certain age range and you had to be kind of hardworking, upstanding, temperate, right? He didn't want drunkards to take the gift because it would be a waste. And so you see in the records that there are reference letters about the 3,000 individuals who ultimately get identified to be as part of this gift. But these partners, and these are just some of the partners, are central to, actively making this gift possible. And I should say, we've got religious figures, right? We've got medical doctor. James McKeon Smith is the first Black medical doctor. He goes to Scotland to get his medical degree, and he has a pharmacy and office in New York City. And then Frederick Douglass. They call this, in Gerrit Smith's language, a scheme of justice and benevolence. I like to think of, or try to at least give you a sense of what this gift meant and what people like Lyman Epps would have been hearing, the language of this gift, of what it would have meant and how it was being represented and why it was meaningful. And so I'm quoting here both Gerrit Smith in 1848 and Henry Highland Garnett, who was another partner in this initiative. Henry Highland Garnett is pictured at the top there. He was the pastor of the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church at the time that Lyman Epps would have been living there, and likely was hearing Henry Highland Garnett preach about this. Henry Highland Garnett was also very active in the National Convention meeting that happened in Troy in 1847. So you can see in the first quote, you have Gerrit Smith saying in 1848, quote, and I can't do him justice probably, "In the development of your dignity and capabilities, the slaveholder would, awestruck, behold what manhood, what dignity, what capabilities he had been trampling on in the persons of his slaves. His slaveholding heart would now die within him. The rod of the oppressor would fall from his relaxed grasp, and the oppressed go free." This was Gerrit, what he was saying. If you did this, if you joined this experiment and had this success, this is what's going to happen. So what is he saying there is going to happen there? What does that mean? What is he saying is going to happen?
Well, it's very optimistic.
Yes.
Slaveholders would recognize the error of their ways.
Exactly. They'd have.
But just by the act of these people going up and establishing their own homesteads in the Adirondacks, a way of sort of spreading the emancipation.
Yes. Yep. So his hope, Gerrit Smith's hope, remember, the movement of moral suasion at this time in the abolitionist movement, that they were often still relying on the idea that we could convince the slaveholders, right, that of the error of their ways, and how immoral this institution was, and we're going to convince them finally to the rod of the oppressor would fall, right, and the oppressed would go free once they saw how successful you would be at this land grant and becoming farmers and living as men, right? Manhood, what dignity, right? Because there was very much the idea that slavery prevented you from being able to be that, right? And without dignity, right? Without agency. So Gerrit Smith was not only thinking about the economic and political opportunities for Northern free Black people, right, of giving you a new life, but also seeing this as part of a broader anti-slavery endeavor, right? Thinking that this reform movement was going to have the power to help the millions of enslaved peoples elsewhere. Right? So you can imagine Lyman Epps and his neighbors and others around the state hearing this, and you can imagine being, if you know, we can't know, right? But you can imagine or try to understand the level of frustration that free Black peoples were experiencing at this time, right? And powerlessness, right? Or you know, how do you keep having hope that you're going to get rights, right, that are entitled to you as a human being, right, that are being denied to you, right, even outside of the institution of slavery, right? And so you can imagine hearing this and being hopeful and inspired, right, to be a part of this movement. You have Henry Highland Garden. Now, this is actually from an amazing source. We have the text of a sermon that he gave on the eve of folks going up to the Adirondacks. And so he's got this speech of, take with you the spirit of freedom, plant the tree of liberty upon the mountain plains, that it may spread its branches far and wide. It's such a great image, right, of thinking about the meaningfulness of this endeavor and the hopefulness of this endeavor, right? That's what you're hearing in that building. That's the Liberty Street Church. You would have heard thunderous oration and preaching about the meaningfulness of your actions of going up into the mountains to start your new life, right? So you have Lyman Epps and you have others who are convinced by this and wanting to be a part of it. Although you see from this slide that only a smaller number than the 3,000 actually came up to be a part of this movement. And this gets into the questions that we already had raised about how was this received by folks in the Adirondacks. And so, you know,
Was that 200 families or 200 individuals?
200 individuals, but the individuals are not 200 grantees. So it's even fewer grantees because it's grantee family members and extended household members. And so there's been a lot of ink spilled about the reasons for why not as many people decided to come after going through the process of getting this land. And so, you know, I can ask you that question as well. I know I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock too, of why people ultimately may have decided not to go. Yes.
Because it's too cold in the winter.
It may be, you know, daunting to think about farming in this area where it's cold and again, the conditions are not ideal.
But
Although
there are a few
people,
farms up there.
there are definitely farms up there, and the thought that it wasn't possible is certainly been critiqued, right? And we do have viable farms. What I would say is there are viable farms, but those viable farms were taken pretty quickly in the early years of settlement, right? Identifying the land that would have been the best land for farming. Those were kind of eaten up, right, by settlers during the earlier waves of settlement. And so what is left is less desirable, right, that they were given here. Other thoughts about why they might not have come?
You have to leave your community behind.
Exactly, right.
During those days was everything.
Yes.
Social or emotional support.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can think about what was present in a community like Troy, right? I mentioned, you have churches, you have schools, you have economic opportunity, you have your community, right? You have newspapers, you have your family and extended network where you may feel, that's your community. And so the thought of going into this place that you don't know with not as many people maybe as intended, I often think about how this history would have played out had a larger number actually chosen to go, right? That you could have maybe recreated the communities and the institutions because you would have had a more of a denser community of settlers, right, at this time. But in lieu of that, you would have had to radically change your lifestyle and your network and disconnect from your network to some degree. Any other thoughts on why you might not go?
How, when they announced this, whoever did.
Yep.
How they limit it to either a former slave, people that were slave, did it get beyond New York in terms of a notion or anything?
So as part of this gift, these are New Yorkers, and they're all free peoples, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
they were not enslaved, although there are some freedom seekers who were given land, right, as part of it. But so yeah, that they were free New Yorkers at this time. Yes.
When did New York end slavery? Was it like 1837?
Only 20 years earlier, right? 1827.
27.
We're coming on the 200th anniversary
Okay.
of the end of slavery in New York.
There were
So
slaves here in St. Lawrence County.
yeah, there were slaves. Yep. In
It's sad, but.
yes, indeed. Yep.
So farming requires specialized skills and knowledge, and that if you don't own a farm or have grown up on a farm, you're not really gonna know what to do when you get there.
Exactly, right? So, and not only that, you may not have the tools, the animals, right? The equipment, the seed, all of that, the capital that you would need to invest and establish a farm, right? Enough to be able to grow a crop that could have you survive through the winter, right? That first field season, that first season, right, was so crucial. And so you would have had to uproot yourself, and without proper, resources, it would have been quite a challenge, right, to make it go. And I think
summer would be spent clearing the land and building a house.
exactly.
When you're gonna have time to farm.
Exactly, right. And I think
in May.
exactly. And I think had there been a larger concentration of people who could pool resources and clear land easier and help each other, that would have increased the chances of having more success.
Did Gerrit Smith offer any of the resources?
So there were conversations about whether to do this. And my understanding is that he was concerned that if he gave them too much, that the message sent to others would be that they got so much help, that's why they succeeded.
Oh.
And so he felt that it was already going to be questioned because they were given the land to begin with. But if they then got more resources, that would be another knock against any success that they would have, that they would still be thought that they were being helped too much.
That sounds like things today.
Not much has changed, indeed. Yep. So all of these things would have been barriers, very real barriers, just transportation up from, I mean, they gave away land to people from every county in New York, right? So you're coming from all over New York. We have a big ledger. It's an amazing document that has the list of the 3,000 names from all of the different counties. And so Lyman Epps is in that ledger. And he's accompanied by a handful of families from Troy, and they have been the focus of the work that I've been doing. So you do have a little bit of a cluster from Troy, and I think that that would have been beneficial, right? Because they likely knew each other from the neighborhood. They probably were all had been members of the church and were probably active in the convention movement and knew each other.
Yeah,
And so that would have helped.
I was worried about his wife. Who was far on in her pregnancy.
Exactly.
Were there other women there?
There were, and she actually ends up, the question was about the wives, you know, the broader family network. And so Anne was pregnant with twins when they arrived, and when she does give birth, she actually does lose one of the twins. So only one of the children survives. We know a lot about Timbuctoo in part because John Brown, the famous or infamous, depending on where you're from in this country, abolitionist, was a part of this movement. He had heard about this gift and wanted to support it. And so he moves his family up to the Adirondacks to be a partner and collaborator to support the grantees in their efforts to farm. He ends up, as it becomes known that it's not going as planned, not attracting as many, he decides to turn his attention elsewhere, to Kansas, over the battles over slavery in bleeding Kansas, and he turns to violence there in the battles over getting Kansas in as a free state instead of a slave state. And then he starts to plan the raid on Harper's Ferry, which happens in 1859. But his family does build a house, and this is a state historic site, the John Brown Farm. This was finished in 1855. So they moved to the Adirondacks in 1849, and they live in a different home, and they finally move into this one in 1855. The Brown family ends up becoming very close friends with the Epps family. And in fact, when you go to the Brown farm and you ask for a flashlight, or you get your flashlight on your phone and you shine it into the rafters, Lyman Epps's name is actually written in the roof rafters. He likely was involved in the building of that structure. It was built by his son-in-law, Henry Thompson, who was married to Ruth Brown, one of John's older children. Henry Thompson was a local North Elba family, activist-minded family who built this. And some of the Thompson children end up dying in the raid on Harper's Ferry as well. So this movement, this history has been documented. It has been remembered by early historians, and most of the emphasis has been on the failure narrative of this, because most of the grantees didn't come, and those who did come, you have some who leave soon thereafter. You have many who decide to take the deed and take land ownership, but not settle, right? So to kind of not go, but become property owners. Does that make sense? Many of those end up losing their land for non-payment of taxes because they can't afford to pay the taxes. The narrative failure is emphasized, although more recently, thanks to Amy Godine's scholarship, and if you've not gotten her book yet, it's over there. It's The Black Woods. It's a remarkable book that represents years of research that she did on the Timbuctoo settlement and the broader land gift. And so that work that she's done, now I very much see my work and the work of the archaeologist on this, as in concert with the work that Amy has done to flesh out this experience and to better understand this experience and to better recognize it as being so important to Adirondack history, New York State history, and the nation's history, to recognize these Adirondacks, as being a part of something that was very meaningful and significant at this time, this effort that was an anti-slavery effort, that was a an effort of social justice, a scheme of benevolence and justice. So the archaeology that we've been doing has been designed to locate sites connected to the experiment. And because many people said that that was going to be very challenging, and it in fact has, and I will talk a little bit about that, to identify sites associated with this history and to document what daily life was like for the people who were involved. And this includes both the grantees themselves and other people in the community who supported them. So other activists, so white and Black, to be a part of this effort, to be a part of this historic effort of activism. Right? The work has also involved collaboration and education for my students at SUNY Potsdam, and also work that I've really been emphasizing over the last few years to work with local teachers and school kids and members of the public to try and make sure this history is more well-known and understood, and that the folks of Timbuctoo are viewed as being the face of Adirondack history as much as loggers are, and as much as, the great camps and, the tourism industry and the hotels and all of that, that this is also the face of Adirondack history too. So what have we done in terms of excavation? Well, we've been doing this work since 2009, so it's been a long time that we've been at it. We first targeted the household that we knew was given to the Epps family, which was in the deep woods of North Elba, not that far from the John Brown farm. So we dug at sites associated with that household in 2009, 2011, and 2013. So I took students out there as part of a month-long excavation. And then we shifted gears and also dug at John Brown Farm to talk about the broader Timbuctoo story of the network of activists who were involved in that effort. And then the last couple of field seasons, we've been at a place called Heaven Hill Farm, which is a place where Lyman Epps and his family worked. They were employed and worked there for a farmer named Anna Newman. So where are we? All of the pink are parcels that had been given away as part of this experiment. This is just North Elba that I was looking at with this image. So you can imagine, had everyone taken possession of this land, it would have been quite different for the demographics of this area. But the dark red is where we know people actually did settle. And Epps is in that box that's right there, the southwest corner of lot 84, which is, again, not that far from where the John Brown farm is. It's probably like a mile or two as the crow flies from the John Brown farm. And so that's where we decided to focus our efforts. Again, you can see that inside that box, there's a few parcels that are red, and all of those grantees were from Troy. So you had a little bit of a community there of shared knowledge and resources that they could benefit from. And I call this is really the Timbuctoo cluster, is this one that's not that far from the Brown farm off of Bear Cub Road, if you know where that is. Timbuctoo is only one of the clusters, but because this this experiment was broader than just these parcels. There are different other clusters with different names. And so Timbuctoo is just one of them. Gives you a little bit of a sense of the Lyman Epps household. This is from I think this is the 1860 census. We know they were on their parcel from 1849 to 1863. And you can see the number of children that they had. This is them at 44, and Anne is 40, and Eveline is now 15. Lyman is now 12. And then you've got Albertine, Albert, Anne, and Kate. So, and we know that they lost, I think, two children are probably buried out in the Adirondack woods. This image here, you can see also that Lyman is being characterized as of mixed heritage. Anne is being labeled as Black here in the record, and all of the children are being labeled as Black. Just to give you a sense of their identity and how they are being recognized. We know a little bit about the landscape that they were given. So this is the lot. This is the 40-acre parcel that the Epps family was given. And this is a map showing the quality of the land, the soils. And so green is like decent land, yellow is less decent, and then white doesn't even make it onto the scale, right? So you can see that from the beginning, we're starting with land that's going to be challenging, but the Epps family actually does eke out a decent farm. He's able to grow corn, which is something unusual for that community based on the agricultural schedules. So he does have success there. And when we dug, we did find some possible evidence of that farm, including 19th century structural materials like nails, and including things like horseshoes, although they're not diagnostic. We can't date them to the mid 19th century. So we don't know if that is connected to logging activity that would have happened in the woods as well. So we never found a good concentration of household remains in this area. You can imagine 40 acres is a large land mass. To find what was likely something that had limited visibility, because these are log structures, not cellar holes, not stone foundations. They probably just had cornerstones and a dirt floor. They were probably log, they were definitely log, so it limits the number of nails and brick and the building materials that would have been left behind. So we didn't have a lot of luck finding the homestead on the land that is now recognized as the southwest corner of Lot 84. But we did notice on a map that dates to the 1900 that there was a structure just above the line. And so we decided to go to where it was that was just above the line. Again, this is the deep woods, so there's not a lot of activity in this area. So knowing that there was on the map in 1900 some structures, we decided to go there and see if we could find any dated material that dated to the mid 19th century when they would have been there. And we knew from a descendant of a later owner that they had bought the land from the Eppses. And this is a picture of what his grandparents' house looked like that they had bought from the Eppses. But we didn't know if this was built by his grandparents or if this is what the Eppses' house looked like, and they just took ownership of it. So that was one of the goals for the archaeology. So this is the map that's showing the Epps lot with those three structures just above the line. And we know that there were survey problems. And so we knew that there could have been questions about where the boundaries of the lot were at this time. And so maybe they thought that that was their land. Also, it could be that they just ignored the survey boundaries because there weren't others there, and maybe that spot would have been better, and maybe they were able to get access to water because there is water there. And so we decided to ask the state for permission to dig here, and so we did that in 2011 and 2013. And so we found a lot of material culture in this clearing, and there's still a clearing here, no structural remains on the surface, but we dug here and found lots of evidence of a home here. You can see there are cast iron stove parts. There's a medicine bottle I think I have close up here. This is shoe parts right here. That's a shoe heel, and then lighting glass around it. This is actually shoe leather. Let's see if I can get this right here. Do you see that? That's shoe leather with the holes for the laces right there, the grommets. We found toys. This is a cast iron horse. That was pretty cool. We found ceramics. We found glassware. This is a mason jar. This is a pressed glass bowl or some kind of fancy tableware right there. This is a suspender clasp. Any thoughts on this one? Our local North Country traditions. Exactly, maple tap, right? To get maple sap and make syrup. One of the things that we realized when we saw lots of artifacts here, but they were generally from the turn of to the 20th century instead of from the mid 19th century. And we never found, like, this had a patent date of 1903 on the back of it. So we knew that it was associated with the later household, not the Eppses. So that was frustrating. We dug for 2 field seasons and decided that we just didn't see enough evidence to do a 3rd field season, that it's likely that the Eppses were living somewhere else and not here. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I was curious about the shoe that you found.
Yeah.
I take it that was something that was pretty much handmade, do you think?
Well, it would have been turn of the century, and so it could have been, not handmade.
Any idea what size it would have
I think that one was a men's shoe.
been?
Yep. We found multiple shoes, so you're gonna see another shoe in a second.
Did you ever size them to find out what size?
I don't think we sized them.
That would be
Yeah.
interesting to find
It
out.
would, yeah. I'm gonna zip through some of this because I know we're short on time and I want to make sure you get back to work or wherever. We shifted gears to decide to explore the experience and kind of walk in the footsteps of the grantees and of the Epps family by digging at the Brown farm. And so this was in 2017. And we found great archaeology here as well. You can see this is a sand fill that's capping what the topsoil would have been. This would have been the ground surface earlier in the 20th century. So we found a lot of material in this layer right here. They capped it with sand as a way to make it more pedestrian friendly. And so that was a nice cap for some of the remains that we were finding. And I have some of these objects here, including the sewing scissors. These are one of our favorite objects, and you can come up and look. We dug with the great granddaughter of John Brown, and this was her favorite object, obviously. And I always joke that a woman was sewing on the porch of the John Brown farm and lost her scissors, and we found them 150 years later. And so these are stork scissors. They're shaped like a bird, if you know, and they still make them today. And they're because women who were doing sewing were also involved in midwifery. We found ceramics, we found medicine bottles like this one. We found more shoe parts, and I have a shoe heel here. This is from a men's boot here. We found, I think they were probably repairing shoes, which is why we were getting some of those shoe parts. Mason jar fragments, so they were canning their own food. We found lots of glass, lots of ceramic. Most of this is dating to the time after the Browns no longer lived there. They moved out to California after John is executed in 1859. Mary Brown, John's wife, says, I'm out of here, no more cold winters, I'm done, I'm going to California. And so she goes in 1863 with her family. We then, in 2022, 2024, we shifted gears to the Hinckley Holt Newman farm, which was a beautiful spot to do testing at. This again was the farm where Lyman Epps worked as a farm hand. You can see that that was part of his economic strategy, right? It was not enough for him to be his own farmer. He had to work elsewhere. And we know that this farm was associated, it's the oldest standing structure, or thought to be the oldest standing structure in North Elba. It's associated first built by the Hinckley family, which actually marries into the Brown family. So we know that they were of similar mindset. The daughter Abigail here marries Salmon Brown and ends up moving out to California as well. Hinckley was a religious person, was a profitable farmer, was one of the leading landowners and farmers in North Elba at this time, but clearly probably activist minded as well because of the close relationship with the Browns. They are living here for 30 years. And then eventually they give it to an in-law, and then he sells it to Anna Newman, who is this amazing figure. She is an eccentric, or I guess that's, you know, how her like obituary characterizes her as. She's actually characterized as the Adirondacks' strangest woman. And we can kind of critically evaluate that label and say she was a single woman who comes from Philadelphia and decides to give up her elite lifestyle and farm. And so that made her the Adirondacks' strangest woman. She was one of the leading employers in the community, and she employs a lot of local folks to do the farm labor. And Lyman Epps is known to have been the, he drove the team of oxen. And so we have a photo of, I can't remember, I think it's like Buck and Star were the names of the oxen, but we don't have a picture of Epps there. We did very fruitful archaeology there, very rich set of material culture. These are some of the smaller, older ceramics that we found from the mid-19th century, likely from the Hinckley era. We also found evidence of eating and butchering. So these are pig bone and teeth that were found right behind where the kitchen would have been. This is we don't usually get backyard photos, but this has been a blessing of a photo because this is where we were digging, likely right outside the back door. So you could see a lot of activity, including this water pump right here. That's sticking. She had an extensive water pipe system, and we'll see a picture of that in a second. But we also found a midden area, which is a fancy word for dump, and found lots of ceramic and glass and personal adornment objects like that button, yellowware bowls, mixing bowls, mason jars, ceramics that are largely plain. This is from this past summer's field work. Lots of whitewares, lots of very not expensive ceramics. That's a pig cow bone with other evidence of butchering marks. And that's here as well for you to see. Lots of stoneware, fragments, food storage, food preparation, and the food service ware, the tableware, the plates and the bowls are largely undecorated, cheap ware. She could have afforded porcelain, but is not buying the porcelain. Medicine bottles. This is the strapping metal from a trunk. That was a cool find this summer. This is a Civil War era soldier's button that we found. And this is a picture of the water pipe system that we found that she had on her farm. She seems to be investing her money not in fine things, but in things to make her life easier on the farm, including access to water. And so she invests a lot of money in this wooden water pipe system that was wrapped in metal. And so we saw this in 2022, and then we dug again, and you can see we found another part of that pipe there, but then we kept digging and actually found a wooden water pipe here. You can still see how red, it's probably cedar because of its water resistant quality. And so that was that was like on the last day of the excavation, which is always what happens. So in terms of takeaways for the work, just to summarize really broadly, I think the story of Timbuctoo and the story of the grantees and the story of the people who supported it is a story of resilience and survival and resistance. It's also a story of allyship and, as it says here, mutual reliance of people coming together to support a cause at a time when people weren't doing that. And that this is a remarkable community that was created of a network of people, Black and white, who supported this experiment. Engaging in what a historian from New York State calls radical empathy. This also has been a project of exploring ideas of historic preservation and public memory. A lot of the objects that we found at the John Brown farm actually are from an era where it's a tourist attraction, where people are starting to go to the farm as a way of remembering this history. And so that's also a really interesting chapter in Adirondack history as an early tourist attraction. It also has been the archaeology of collaboration and shared heritage. This is actually John Brown's great granddaughter right there, and she dug with us. She was wonderful. And we've also engaged youth from some of the sending communities in the capital region to work with us. And this is a teacher workshop that has been centered on Timbuctoo that we've just started to involve educators in the work, and hopefully we'll have more programming and curriculum that teachers are going to be able to take advantage of to make sure that this history is taught in the local communities of the Adirondacks, so that people can know again that this is important part of Adirondack history, that Adirondack history needs to be perceived as a more inclusive narrative with a diverse set of people who were making a difference and helping to make history in this region. And I thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to take questions even though it's a little bit late at this point.
Where is that sign?
This sign, yes. This sign, we applied for a grant to the Pomeroy Foundation to get a marker of Timbuctoo on at the intersection of Old Military in Lake Placid, the bypass road, if you know, on the way to the John Brown farm, and Bear Cub Road. So it's right where this enclave, it's not right on the property where Epps was and some of the other settlers were, but it's in this enclave, this area. So that's why the marker says Lyman Epps and other Black New Yorkers settled nearby is the important word. Yes.
Okay, so the Epps family left in 1863.
So they move out of their home in the woods, and they actually only move about 2 miles away to another house on Bear Cub Road that had been occupied by Ruth Brown and her husband, Henry Thompson. So when Ruth and Henry leave to go to California, the Eppses come out of the woods and into a frame structure that would have been on much better land. So they didn't leave Lake Placid or North Elba. They just leave their original house in 1863.
Okay, so then the other families that were there, how many of them stayed there beyond like 1863?
So not a lot of them. There's a handful that stay not in North Elba, but in some of the surrounding communities and counties. So yeah, so there are some that do put down roots, and there are some descendants who a few generations that live there, including in this area.
Okay, so there are some descendants still living in
There are some descendants. Yep. And we know that, so on the land that we've been digging currently, the Heaven Hill farmland, it's owned by the Eline Foundation, and they actually also own what became the second Epps property. And so it's our hope in the future to dig there as well.
Okay.
Any other questions? Were there any online questions, Carlene, do you know? Yeah, it looks like.
Somebody said in the chat, thank you so much.
Oh,
It was
good.
an amazing presentation.
Oh, good.
I think there was a question early on that you ended up answering.
Oh, okay,
just
good.
about the rationale.
Excellent, good.
So, yeah, I think
Alright,
we'll stop the recording.
yeah.
So thank you so much, those who joined us online. Thank you, everybody, for being here.